Now joining me live from Canberra is Liberal MP and a regular Spectator Australia columnist, Kevin Andrews. Kevin, great to see you. You've written a piece in the Spectator Australia this week on the Sun Tzu style, the art of war style military approach of Xi Jinping, who's obviously studied Sun Tzu very closely, particularly when it comes to the Pacific. Give us your insights.
Oh, good evening, Rowan. Yes, Xi Jinping has consistently said that you can use force in order to prevent war. What that means is spelled out in more detail by the PLA, which says you can't cross the Chinese Communist Party red lines. And what are those red lines? It includes regarding Taiwan, for example, and anything within the so-called 9-dash line as part of mainland China. And in fact, there's been two more ominous developments in the past few days. Firstly, a spokesman for the Chinese Communist Party has said that the whole of the Taiwan Straits, that area of water between mainland China and Taiwan, is now Chinese territory. It's not international waters, which has historically been the case. And secondly, Xi Jinping has issued some legal articles which authorise the Chinese military to be able to use force effectively anywhere around the world to protect Chinese interests. So this is a very significant escalation on the part of Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party in terms of the security threats to not just the immediate area of China, but indeed to the whole Indo-Pacific.
Kevin, you've also noted how Sun Tzu famously, said the best way to win a war is to not actually fight it, but to do it through economic means and others. We've certainly seen plenty of evidence that Xi Jinping studied up on that aspect of the art of war. But tell us, you've also written extensively in the Spectator Australia, not only about the persecution of Christians worldwide, but specifically the persecution of Christians in China and now in Hong Kong. And this is intriguing, the way in which the Pope has, I guess there's no other word for it, basically appeased the communists. Has the Pope himself thrown China's Christians to the dragon, Kevin?
Well, it's not just Christians. I mean, the Muslim Uyghurs in Western China have been very significantly persecuted by the communist regime,
Absolutely.
As has the Tibetans and indeed others. But the developments in Hong Kong, where a cardinal of the church, Cardinal Zen, was arrested by the Chinese communist authorities with some others for effectively doing nothing more than being the trustee of a fund which provided some funding for the legal defence of people in Hong Kong. Whenever and wherever else in the world has it been a crime to actually assist people in the defence within their court cases, to provide some assistance for that? I mean, in a country like Australia, we have a legal aid system that actually does that. But somehow in communist China, to do that is now an offence, and we have a cardinal of the church being arrested. What is, I think, shameful about this is that the Vatican, under the current Pope, Francis, has entered into a secret agreement with the Chinese regime, an agreement which has been renewed. Nobody knows what it is. When asked about it, when legislators from around the world have sought to have some discussion with the Pope and his officials about this, they've refused to do so. When Cardinal Zen went to Rome himself to have a discussion with the Pope, he was refused an audience by the Pope. I mean, once upon a time, historically, the Pope was one of those few moral voices in the world who could stand up for the dignity and the freedom and the liberty of individuals. But instead of that, we seem to have a Vatican under Pope Francis, which is effectively appeasing the Chinese Communist Party. And what's the outcome for this? If we could see some improvement in the conditions of not just Christians, but religious believers generally in China, then there may be some argument to say, well, this is being effective. But the fact is, over the last few years, and indeed over the last few months, the situation for all believers, whether Christians or Uyghurs or Buddhists or whoever, has gone backwards.
And Kevin, also, isn't it the case that, unlike anywhere else in the world, that the deal done between the Vatican and Xi Jinping gives the Chinese communists ultimately a kind of theological position within the Christian church, certainly in China?
It certainly does. It gives them a say in terms of the appointment of bishops, and you can be sure that the Chinese Communist Party are not going to allow the appointment of bishops that they don't agree with. In fact, people who won't ultimately kowtow to the Chinese Communist line. We have, in terms of religion, in churches, in temples, and in other religious places in China, photos of Xi Jinping on the wall and sayings by Xi Jinping on the wall have prayers having to be uttered for the Chinese Communist Party, whether it's in temples or in mosques or in Christian churches in China. So this is something which I think all religious believers, and even people who just believe in religious freedom, even if they don't have a religious belief themselves, should be very concerned about, because the Chinese will tolerate nothing other than the political. The political trumps everything, including free speech, including freedom of association and freedom of religion. And this is very worrying. And we're seeing that now being forced on Hong Kong, once a very free, vibrant part of the world, which the clampdown is going on. And if China was ever to overtake and invade Taiwan, the same thing would happen to the 25 million people in Taiwan.
Kevin Andrews, it's always disturbing, but always a pleasure to read your great writing in The Spectator Australia, for your insights and your very thorough analysis of what is happening in China. It is hugely disturbing, but thank you for keeping an eye on it for us. Thank you, Kevin.